How you doing? I tell you, your favorite Uncle Lou's been under the weather for the last couple of days. I ain't eat nothing but chicken noodle soup and drank Gatorade and orange juice for the last couple of days, trying to get over some kind of I don't know what it is, a head cold or something. But anyway, the show must go on. And the show is definitely rolling on at the University of Tennessee. Our boys up in Knoxville done give football head coach John Hopeful a massive raise and contract extension. I want to talk about that in today's video. When I first heard the details of this, coaching salaries in general aren't something I keep up with all that much in terms of like knowing what coaches make what amount of money. I generally off the top of my head. I mean, I know some. Everybody knows. Saban, Kirby, Dabo, Lincoln Riley. You kind of know like the ones that make the most amount of money and kind of about what they make, right? 9, 10, 11 million a year in that range or whatever. I don't keep up with coaching salaries specifically though across college football, and I have to admit something here. When I first heard the numbers for this new contract for John Hopeful, Tennessee's head coach, I said, "Oh boy, this is ridiculous. This amount of money, considering what he's done or hasn't done, this is insane." Well, after I actually found an article that was published yesterday, so I'm assuming these are accurate numbers. If I can remember, I'll put a link to the article in the description because it actually has some interesting stuff in there. It breaks contracts down by base salary and incentives and buyout, and it tells you um, it's got a list of coaches who've been fired recently and what the buyouts were. It's just an interesting article. But what I was looking for was a list of the highest paid coaches to try to figure out where John Hopeful fell in that list. And after going through a list, I guess it's top 15, I guess I found here. Top 13, whatever it is, highest paid college football coaches. I have to admit, the contract and the money that John Hopeful will be making is in line with some other coaches who have similar accomplishments or lack thereof. So I don't know that this is necessarily that out of whack with what's going on in college football. Now, I still hold the same opinion about coaching contracts that I've held for the last year or two in terms of buyouts. The way these contracts are structured is ridiculous, and we'll talk about that when we start looking through some of these numbers here. But the issue that I have with college coaching contracts is not the amount of money that these coaches are making. I think a school should pay a head coach the most they can afford to pay him if they think he's the guy. Like, I've got no issue with a coach making X amount of dollars a year. None. My issue with contracts, whether you're talking about Georgia and Kirby Smart and Bama and Saban, I mean, they're just the top of the heap when it comes to college coaches, or whether you're talking about brand new coaches or coaches who haven't been that successful, my issue is not necessarily the money that universities are paying them per year. My issue has been these guaranteed contracts for X number of years. I mean, a lot of these contracts are running for 10 years now, and sort of Texas A&M has kind of become the poster boy of what I'm talking about here. You say you're going to pay a coach whatever you're going to pay him a year. Let's just use $10 million because that's an easy number to work with. Okay, great. You're going to pay that coach $10 million a year. The length of the contract, though, is the problem. You're giving out 10 mil, 10 years, basically $100 million, right? Well, what if the coach is terrible? What if he has 2 or 3 just horrific seasons in a row? What if he decides he doesn't want to recruit anymore and he just is lounging around all day instead of out recruiting, and you decide you want to fire him? You got to pay him the full value of the contract in a lot of these cases. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. The only reason Jimbo Fisher is currently the head coach at Texas A&M is because they can't afford their own buyout. Again, I've got no issue with Jimbo making 8, 9, 10, 11, we'll see what it is here in a second, $1 million a year at Texas A&M. But the fact that he's had just disappointment after disappointment since being there, capped off this last season by a year that was so bad they didn't even make a bowl game, yet Texas A&M is forced to keep him because his contract has got a guaranteed clause in it with a buyout. That $80 million it would cost Texas A&M to fire him. They'd be paying Jimbo Fisher $80 million not to work. That's Texas A&M's fault. That's all these schools' fault for agreeing to and signing these contracts that includes all this guaranteed money for coaches. That's where the problem is coming in, because it's causing schools to keep coaches that they otherwise wouldn't keep. There's no reason to keep Jimbo Fisher at A&M, but he's there because his agent negotiated a contract with Texas A&M that makes it where they can't fire him because they can't afford it. And Jimbo Fisher is just an example I'm using, but there are lots of examples of this. You think Michigan State's going to fire Mel Tucker in the next year or two? No, they can't afford it. So anyway, let's go down some of this list here. But the money that Tennessee is paying John Heupel is not out of whack compared to what coaches with similar resumes are making. But let's start with this list starts with the number 13, but there are some ties on here, so I think it's 15 coaches total. But anyway, 13, James Franklin, Penn State, makes $7 million a year. $7 million a year. He's won the conference. He's made a New Year's Six game. That's sort of the peak of his accomplishments, right? He's pretty much done everything you can do in college football short of making the playoffs. He's won a division, he's won the conference, and he's played in a New Year's Six game. That's about all you can do without making the playoffs. So I know James Franklin's a polarizing kind of coach. I happen to love James Franklin. I think he's a great coach. The fact that he was winning 9 and 10 games a year at Vandy is all I ever need to know about James Franklin. I don't care what he does at Penn State. He'll always be a good coach in my book. And breaking news to some people, I don't know, Penn State's going to be really, really good next year. If Penn State's not really good next year, then I'll start criticizing James Franklin as well. Penn State's set up to have a good year next year, but James Franklin is the 13th highest paid. Again, there are some ties, so he's really about the 15th highest paid college football coach at $7 million a year. Jim Harbaugh, all the way down at number 12. Now, this goes back to sort of his flirting with the NFL type of thing. He actually renegotiated his contract a few years ago. The university lowered some of the base salary, lowered like some of the buyout type stuff when he was underperforming. Now, of course, he's made the playoffs 2 years in a row, beat Ohio State 2 years in a row, won his division 2 years in a row, won the conference 2 years in a row. Yet to win a playoff game, but still made the playoffs 2 years in a row. Making the playoffs, as long as we have a 4-team playoff, making the playoffs is a huge accomplishment. He's making a measly $7.05 million a year. Wait till you hear some of the names on this list that are making more money than Jim Harbaugh, and maybe this helps us understand why Harbaugh continues to flirt with the NFL. Number 11 on this list, Luke Fickell. Now, I'm torn on this one because I love Luke Fickell. I think he's a great coach, and I think he's going to succeed in the Power 5. He succeeded in the Group of 5, but it was the Group of 5. Now, unlike some other Group of 5 success stories, like, Tom Herman, Luke Fickell has actually made the playoffs as head coach of the Group of 5 team, Cincinnati. Is that something he's going to be able to repeat at Wisconsin? We'll see. Now, the Big Ten West is a disaster right now. I think just hiring Luke Fickell immediately makes Wisconsin the favorite to win the West next year. Is winning the West good enough to compete to win the Big Ten as a whole, though? The East is just so far ahead right now. I don't know. But Luke Fickell, $7.8 million a year to be the coach at Wisconsin, making more than Jim Harbaugh? I don't know about that. Number 10, Mario Cristobal. Now, what has Mario Cristobal done? Well, at Miami, he ain't done a damn thing, and that's who's paying him. I guess Miami is paying him for the success he had at Oregon. This is alarming. You're paying a head coach for what he did at another school. Congratulations, Miami, man. But you're paying Cristobal $8 million a year. And all he did was go out and shit the bed. Now, I still think Miami's future is pointed upwards just because of his recruiting ability and sort of the staff's ability down there to acquire talent. I think Miami will have a better year this coming year. How much better remains to be seen. But Cristobal's making $8 million a year at Miami. And now we get to 3 people all making $9 million a year. One of them, Tennessee head coach John Heupel. Tennessee just renegotiated John Hopeful's contract for the 2nd year in a row. He was hired at, I believe, $4 million a year. And what did he go? 7-6? Guy goes 7-6. They gave him a raise to $5 million a year. Last year, of course, Tennessee had the best year they've had in 20 years. It's the first time they've won 11 games since, I believe, 2001. Did not win the division. Did not win their conference. Did make a New Year's Six game. No playoffs. That's John Hopeful's accomplishments. His only accomplishments are a 10-2 regular season where he didn't win the division. He's never won the division. He's never played for a conference championship, never made the playoffs. He's now making $9 million a year. They basically doubled his salary. He went from $4 million to $5 million after his first season, and now from $5 million to $9 million he's making going forward. Huge buyout. Huge buyout. Tennessee better hope that was not a fluke, a one-hit wonder type of season. Because you're not firing, with this contract here, Tennessee's not firing John Hopeful anytime in the next 4 or 5 years. They can't afford it. I don't care what Tennessee man types in the comments section about money buried anywhere. You just like Texas A&M, man. Ain't nobody paying no $60, $70, $80 million buyout. So for Tennessee's sake, you better hope John Hopeful knows what he's doing and it wasn't just a fluke. Because you're now stuck with him for at least 4 to 5 years, but you're paying him now $9 million a year. He's tied with Jimbo Fisher and Lane Kiffin. Jimbo Fisher's an interesting one because, of course, he is a national title-winning head coach, and there ain't too many of those walking around. Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Dabo Swinney, that's 3. Jimbo Fisher, 4. Mac Brown, 5. 5 head coaches on planet Earth currently coaching that have national titles. Jimbo Fisher's one of them. He's making $9 million a year to miss bowl games at Texas A&M. The other one is Lane Kiffin. And this is where my initial thoughts on the Tennessee contract started to change. If Lane Kiffin's making $9 million a year, how can you tell me John Hopeful's not worth $9 million a year? They have strikingly similar accomplishments, or lack thereof. Neither's ever won a division. Neither's ever won the conference. Neither's ever made the playoffs. Both led their teams to once-in-a-generation seasons. For Tennessee, this past season, winning 11 games for the first time in a generation, 20 years. Lane Kiffin, not this past season, but the season before, winning double-digit games, 10 I think it was, at Ole Miss for the first time the second time maybe in 50 years. Both making $9 million a year. So your $9 million Manzers are John Hopeful, Jimbo Fisher, and Lane Kiffin. Now we get down to number 8, the top 8 highest paid coaches in all of college football. Matt Rule, Nebraska's new head coach, $9.25 million a year. Now, this is an average over the length of his contract. Matt Rule's got an interesting contract. He's going to get a raise every year regardless of performance on the field. He's not making $9.25 million this season coming up. He's not. I think he's making, in fact, $5 or $6 million this season. But regardless of whether he goes 15-0 or 0-12, his salary goes up next year and the year after and the year after. His average salary over the course of his entire contract is what puts him at $9.25 million a year. By the end of his contract, if Matt Rule is still there and they haven't altered the contract in any way, he's going to be making $12 million a year. Unbelievable. Number 7, Ryan Day, $9.5 million. We all know the knocks on Ryan Day, right? Keeps making the playoffs, can't win a natty. Well, it ain't easy to make the playoffs. And yes, the last 2 seasons have been disappointing with the loss to Michigan, which led to not winning their division or their conference. They still made the playoffs in one of those years, this that just ended. Lost in the first round, but it's hard to argue with Ryan Day being one of the top coaches in college football. I've got my issues with Ryan Day just like everybody else does, including Ohio State fans. He has finally hired an offensive coordinator that he's going to let call plays. At least he claims he's going to let him call plays. We'll see if he actually follows through on that. But when you look at what these other coaches are making around Ryan Day, it's hard to argue against $9.5 million. I mean, he wins. There's only, I think, 2 coaches in all of college football who've won more games than Ryan Day in the last couple of years. So there you go. Ryan Day at $9.5 million. Here's probably the worst one on the bunch besides Jimbo Fisher. Mel Tucker, $9.5 million a year. Absolutely insane. This contract was bad the day it was signed. Everyone knew it. Everyone's been talking about it for 2 years, ever since Michigan State signed Mel Tucker to this contract. It didn't make sense then. It doesn't make sense now. Yeah, they had the one good year 2 seasons ago, made a New Year's Six game, back to the toilet bowl, though. This past year, they couldn't win a game. And the games they lost weren't even close. I mean, they were getting blown out. I think they had 2 or 3 conference wins. That was it. They lost by like an average of 14 points in the rest of their conference games. Were nowhere near being competitive. And Mel Tucker is not a $9.5 million a year coach, but that's what Michigan State is paying him. Number 5, Brian Kelly, also making $9.5 million. Again, hard to argue. Ryan Day and Brian Kelly, Neither have won a national title. Both have done everything short of that, though. Well, Brian Kelly hasn't won a conference because he was at Notre Dame forever, and they don't win conference. They don't. They're not in a conference. But they were that one year, though. Remember COVID? Notre Dame was in the ACC fully that year. They didn't win the ACC title game, but they made it to the ACC title game. And now Brian Kelly's first year at LSU just wraps up. Didn't win the SEC, but made it to the SEC title game. So Brian Kelly's at least made it to 2 SEC title games, something Josh Heupel has yet to accomplish. And he's got a ton of wins over a 10 to 12 year period, a proven track record of winning 10 plus games a year on average. Hard to argue Brian Kelly and Ryan Day at $9.5 million. Mel Tucker at the $9.5 million is ridiculous. Your top 4 highest paid head coaches in order. Number 4, maybe Lincoln Riley. Southern Cal doesn't publish their coaching salaries because they don't have to, but it is widely rumored that Lincoln Riley is making north of $10 million a year. Now, like every other contract, there's all kinds of other incentives and things built into this contract that could juice that up even higher. Some say they bought him a house. Houses out there ain't cheap. That's another few million probably, but the estimates on Lincoln Riley's salary are 10 million plus, somewhere in the 10 to 11 million a year range. But again, Southern Cal does not disclose coaching salaries, so if you want to argue with me and tell me he's making more or he's making less, that's fine. Again, this is from the article I found that was published yesterday. They've got him at 4 at 10 million plus a year, 10 million plus being an estimate. Number 3, Kirby Smart, who was the highest paid coach when his contract was renegotiated after Georgia won the first of 2 national titles back to back. So after the 2021 season, where Georgia won the national title, Georgia renegotiated Kirby's contract, $11.25 million a year at the time. Made him the highest paid coach in college football. Since then, 2 other coaches have renegotiated their contracts. These are your 2 highest paid coaches in all of college football. Number 2, Dabo Swinney, $11.5 million. I've got no problem with Dabo Swinney being one of the top 2 highest paid head coaches. He was underpaid in 15 through 19, 15 through 20, which was their prime run. Of course, they won the national title in 16 and 18, but they made the playoffs 6 years in a row. They were just clearly one of, if not the best programs in football during that period of time. And Dabo was underpaid during that period of time. So even if you think now Dabo's a little overpaid at $11.5 million, it's kind of making up for things he's already done for your university, in my opinion. He deserves this $11.5 million. And again, I've got all kinds of issues with Dabo Swinney. But when you look at what the coaches are making, I mean, what do you want to do? You want to put him at $9 million, the same as Lane Kiffin? Really? I mean, come on. You gotta pay Dabo more than that, right? So he's at number 2, $11.5 million. And Saban, $11.7 million. And again, Saban, like all these other coaches, a bunch of incentives built into the contract. All of these coaches, you get an extra $100,000 if you win your division, or $1 million, or whatever it is. An extra $1 million if you win your conference. An extra $1 million if you make the playoffs. An extra $1 million if you win the national title. All that kind of thing. And Saban's contract is loaded with incentives just like everyone else's is. The difference is Alabama didn't have to pay Saban any of that incentive money last year. Nope, not a single penny of it. Nick Saban didn't hit any of his incentive bonuses for 2022. Wow. Poverty. What's happened to Alabama? I don't know. I'm 44 years old. I'm an old man. I'm old enough to remember when Alabama used to be the most dominant program in football and Nick Saban actually knew what he was doing. Boy, those days are long gone. Anyway, congratulations to Josh Heupel on your new $9 million contract. And for the Tennessee fans, y'all better hope he works out because you can't afford to fire him anytime soon. You're stuck with Josh Heupel for 4 to 5 years. Have a good morning.